Politicians are put there to give you the idea that you have freedom of choice. You don't. You have no choice. You have owners.
I am the Rambling Madman.
I have this feeling, man, because there's a handful of people actually run everything. That's true. It's provable. It's not I'm not a conspiracy nut.
Motherfuckers are so sensitive, the whole country is turned into bitch-ass niggas.
Alright, hello everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Ramblings of a Madman. This is your host, Mark Ciccarella, aka The Rambling Madman. Today we're coming at you live with episode 13. I have a very good episode lined up for you today. I had a great conversation with Amy Belair of the Third Eye Awakening podcast. She is a psychic. We had a tremendous conversation about the Akashic Records, spirituality, and a bunch of stuff like that, and it was a really in-depth conversation, really a great one-on-one conversation, and I think you guys are going to really enjoy it. I want to thank you guys for tuning in yet another week and putting up with my bullshit and listening to me ramble on. I just want to remind everybody, if you can go to my website to listen to the show as opposed to listening to it on YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, wherever you usually listen to it, that's the preferred method for me. Just because I can control my website a lot more than I can control Spotify or YouTube or whatever. YouTube is very strict. I haven't had any bad experiences with the other platforms yet, but who knows what will happen in the future. So I appreciate those who keep going through my site, and I appreciate everybody for listening in general. I have a Patreon account if you want to support the show and you're liking the guests that I'm having on, you're liking the work that I'm putting in by creating the show. You can support me on my Patreon account. Wherever you're listening to this episode, there's links in the description to my Patreon account, I believe my website, and the merch store. If you go to my website, ramblingmadman.org, there's a button in the top right corner that says support me. Click on that. There's a link that'll take you to the Patreon account. There's also a link for the merch store on the website and in the description to the episode, wherever you're listening to it right now. So we have on the merch store, we have hoodies, we have hoodless t-shirts, or hoodless sweatshirts, I should say. We have t-shirts, we have long sleeve tees, we have pillows, we have canvas bags, iPhone cases. We have a bunch of shit on there. We even have baby onesies, rambling of a Madman onesies. If you have a kid out there and you want your kid to be woke like me, get him a Rambling of a Madman onesie. You can't go wrong with that. He will be the talk of daycare. So yeah, if you can support the show, I'd love that. I'd love whenever I see a new notification for Patreon telling me I have a new patron. It's just awesome that people are willing to support me, and it really makes me happy to see that. I don't have a huge audience. I don't have a huge income coming in through Patreon, but it really makes me happy when I see that people are enjoying the show enough to go ahead and support me. And they want to, and they like the show enough that they want to see it keep going on, and they're willing to contribute to this show moving on and growing. So that really means a lot. And so I'll touch on some current events stuff before we jump to the conversation with Amy. Everybody in this conspiracy theory community, you need to chill the fuck out about these Satan shoes that came out, Lil Nas X and the other dude, I'm drawing a blank on the other rapper. But anyway, they released shoes by Nike, Satan shoes, that have a drop of blood in the soles, and everybody's going crazy, oh, this is the satanic Illuminati shit, and they're pushing this agenda on our children. Even if that is the case, dude, calm the fuck down. If you're getting all tore up over Lil Nas X, a gay C-list artist, who is on nobody's radar at all. Do you have the same problem with Black Sabbath or Van Halen or any fucking rock band from 30 to 60 years ago? All the satanic shit. Do you listen to the Grateful Dead, which was most likely a CIA psyop for LSD and the psychedelic movement? Do you have problems with those? Because if you're still listening to that shit, I listen to that shit all the time. I listen to classic rock. I have a classic rock workout playlist for the gym. As Ozzy Osbourne, Van Halen. I listen to "Running with the Devil" a lot at the gym. I love that song. Ozzy Osbourne. There's a lot of woke shit in Ozzy Osbourne's music too. Whether it be Black Sabbath or his solo shit. Crazy Train. Look up the lyrics to Crazy Train. That they're crazy awesome, and you guys have this like fucking satanic panic that existed in the 80s, and you're fucking going apeshit about it, and it drives me nuts because I have a feeling, my personal belief is that they took the truth and they corrupted it. They took the truth of what spiritually could be right, and they corrupted it, and they scared us with the truth to make us fear it, to make us conform to a religion, Christianity or Catholicism, to make us conform to that religion and not seek the actual truth. Because what does Christianity and Catholicism teach you? That the only truth is through God, an external being, a man in the sky, an invisible man in the sky. That's the only way to get the truth. Sorry, that was my my watch going off. But again, they teach you that the only way to get the actual truth is through worshiping and serving and praying to an invisible man in the sky who will send you to hell and fire and brimstone if you don't obey him. They've created a boogeyman. The powers that be have created a Luciferian satanic boogeyman to scare the living, no pun intended, hell out of us, and to make us turn to Christianity and other religions so they can control us, and so that we aren't free thinking, that we aren't looking inward and realizing that we have a lot more power inside of ourselves than meets the eye at first thought. So just think about that. Every time you get all caught up on the Luciferian agenda, there's a lot more shit that doesn't meet the eye, and I'm going to talk a little bit about stuff like that with Amy today, actually, in the conversation that I had with her, and so just keep that in mind. Calm down. I understand the Bible scares the hell out of a lot of people. The fear of God is real, and it can definitely cause people to overreact when it comes to stuff like that. And just try to remember that there's more than meets the eye here, and maybe by studying what you think is satanic or evil, studying what that is, and you can come to some of your own conclusions that aren't just, oh, they're trying to destroy our youth with this satanic agenda, and they're trying to influence us with Lucifer, and there might be some more, but then there might be some more out there, and that's all I'm saying. So I don't want people to freak out about these shoes anymore. It's really driving me insane. And so that's all I'm going to get into today with the current events before I get into the conversation with Amy. It was a great conversation with Amy, and hopefully, I can have her on as a guest again in the future. And I hope you guys enjoy the episode, and I will see you on the other side. Welcome to the show, Amy. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk with you.
Good. Cool. It really does mean a lot to me as a very small podcaster. I've had some pretty big guests on, well, not huge guests, but some pretty big guests in general. And it always astonishes me how willing the people are in this community to help each other out. And even just little guys like me who are obviously going to get, people with bigger names nowhere, but they're still willing to take time out of their busy schedule and, throw me a bone and help me out and have a conversation with me. So I think that's awesome. I really thank you for that.
Oh, it's truly my pleasure. And I feel like I am a little podcaster guy myself. So
okay. All right. So I had originally came across your name. I was listening to Tinfoil Hat, and you were on there a few months ago, and I found your story really interesting. I was like, wow, I'd love to have her on and talk with her and have her tell her story on my show. And basically what I do with most of the guests that I have on the show is I always ask them, the first thing I ask them is, what is their origin story in conspiracy theories? Or in your case, what is your spiritual awakening or your third eye awakening origin story? What made you want to pursue this journey that you're on?
Yeah, well, I feel like it just kind of all developed in little steps, but I don't remember having a big sort of whoa, this is all an illusion. I kind of remember always thinking this was an illusion, but not being like completely awake either. You know what I mean? Like kind of from a kid's perspective of, I was just on a show with somebody else and we were all joking about how none of us wanted to go to school. And even when we were really, really little kids, when we found out that there was optional school called college and university, all of us were like, oh God, why? No way. And of course, all of us ended up going because you get sucked into the system. But I just remember feeling like adults were weird. We do weird things here. I don't understand. And the older I got, the more I felt that pressure of that ridiculous question of what are you going to do with your life? In my, I don't know, I guess my later teens, my mid to later teens, the more it just didn't make sense to me. And I kind of got pressured into going to university, and I let myself be pressured into it. And I was so unhappy, and I looked around and everyone was so unhappy. And I looked at all the adults again and I was like, everyone's so unhappy. Why do we do this? And that sort of was enough to create a crack in my psyche and allow my consciousness to start expanding. And I feel like I kind of always had this ability to see in that way, to not just accept what I'm told without question. But that being said, it has felt like an unfolding, so that 2020 was really illuminating about things that were still in my blind spot, but I was able to see them, you know, pretty much right away. As soon as it started smelling kind of like rotten, I was like, what's going on here? I need to look more deeply. So it just was like partly my nature and then partly simple observation.
No, I understand completely what you mean. I kind of feel like I've always been, ever since I was very little, from like an abnormally young age, like, you know, maybe 5 or 6, questioning, you know, the way things were and the way things were expected to be, and spirituality. I had a really early, you know, questioning of spirituality and Christianity and stuff at a very young age. So I really understand where you're getting at with the, you know, always having like, it's almost like a sixth sense in a way.
Yeah, it is. And it's weird to me that when people don't have it, but that can kind of sound judgmental, and I don't mean it in a judgmental way, because I can see so many reasons that people don't have it, mostly trauma reasons.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so like, I don't really have any context for not questioning. So I don't really understand it very
No,
well.
I'm the exact same way. I have a few friends who I try to talk about stuff like this, and they don't seem to get it. Like I sometimes I have this intense existential dread, and it eats me up sometimes. And I try to explain it to some friends of mine, and he's like, I don't understand why you care so much. It's just, we live and we die, and that's it. And I'm like, but there's got to be something more. There's something, and that's what led me onto this, you know, this journey of like conspiracy theories and spirituality and you know, learning so much stuff. And so it's really interesting to see, you know, there's actually a lot more people than you might think who actually have similar beliefs.
Yeah, I'm finding that too right now as my community grows quite rapidly. And I'm just like, man, there's so many of us. It's so funny that I felt so alone for so long.
Exactly.
But it's just like geographically, we can feel really isolated. Because I still think that we're, in a sense, we're a minority, but we're not as few and far between as it can feel.
Oh, of course. I know exactly what you mean. I actually was recording with Odd Man Out, and he introduced me to another podcaster, and he was like, "Yeah, I think he's from somewhere around you." And it turns out he's a conspiracy theorist like me, and he lives like 20 minutes from me, and and it was like it's weird when stuff like that happens, and sometimes it feels like, you know, it's kind of like set up in a way for that to happen. But what I really loved about hearing you on Tinfoil Hat was your story of the Akashic Records, and that was actually something I've heard about only maybe 2 other times before hearing you speak about it, and it was something I was always interested in, and but I never really knew much about it. And would you want to get into that for me?
Yeah, sure. So are you wanting me to explain the Akashic Records, or explain how I found them, or where do you want me to?
I mean, if you could explain what they are and explain like how you found them and their significance to you, that would be great.
Sure. So my understanding and experience of the Akashic Records is, for me, it feels like a cloud of information. And by cloud, I just mean like it's non-physical in just all around us. Non-local place where there's access to all this information. And the information could sort of be summarized as like, everything that ever was, everything that is, and everything that ever will be, with the caveat understanding that time as we experience it's an illusion. It's not really the accurate way that time, I don't know, that everything exists. So like there's more, basically what I'm saying is there's more information in the Akashic field than our human brains can conceive of, including my human brain. But it just feels like it's just there all around, and that it's actually super easy to access. It's a matter of fine-tuning our own vibration to our own frequency through our consciousness to match that field, so that we can then have access to all that information. And the way that people usually use it is kind of to better understand their soul and their soul journey. So to remember past lives or other lives, and to understand, like uncover, buried memories from this current life, to understand, some like karmic things that we're maybe experiencing, or we think we're experiencing, any blocks or patterns, repeating patterns, any strangely dysfunctional or intense relationships that there's no obvious reason that they would feel so intense in this life based on the context of the dynamic. So just those things that leave us wondering, like, what the fuck, basically. There's information there. There's always an answer. And to me, I find it in the Akashic field. So the Akashic field is that field of information. The Akashic Records is referring to the record of your soul existence.
Of your past, of who you were before.
Yeah, as well as your future. And it's a little bit tricky because future is many. Future is many possibilities, probabilities, and they change depending on who we are right now and how we're vibrating and the choices we're making and the perceptions we hold right now. But that information is still there and accessible. So does that make sense? Do you have any questions about that before I tell you how I found it?
No, it makes a lot of sense. And well, for me, it does. I mean, because I've always been in this, this always looking for spiritual answers and stuff. And I think it makes crystal clear sense. I know there's probably some skeptics out there who are probably like, oh, that doesn't make any sense at all. And what do you mean? It's just a field of, but I see exactly where you're coming from. Can I ask, were you in any point in this process, were you ever like hesitant or fearful to accept like the knowledge that you gained through your journey?
No, I wasn't, especially not by the time I found the Akashic Records. I think I had just done enough like self priming along my journey to be ready to receive that information. But I also, in the years prior, when I was sort of getting some information, but just randomly, I always felt like the information allowed me to understand life better and understand myself better and have more compassion for other people and, just be more of the human that I want to be in this life. And so it never felt, I never felt like God doesn't want us to have this.
That's actually my very next question.
Yeah, I think I was just lucky to not get that programming heavily through my upbringing. Like I was brought up Christian Unitarian, but it was super laid back. I didn't have any like strict requirement of adherence to those belief systems. So I did go through some periods where I had some existential dread of my own as a kid, and like, I kind of took on this like message that I'm a sinner and I'm going to hell. But even then, like, I think I remember crying about it for like a week and then being like, this feels like such bullshit though. Like, why? What have I done wrong? I'm not a perfect kid, but why would God create me and then hate me? Was sort of my feeling.
Yeah, I've had very similar thoughts, and that was actually leading right into my next question, which was going to be like, do you ever come across people who are like, well, maybe this is like something that God doesn't want us to know? And the reason I ask is because I read a lot into Gnosticism and like Buddhism and stuff like that, and I was talking to somebody about it, and they were telling me like, well, that's evil, and God closed your third eye for a reason, because He doesn't want you to see the truth, and He doesn't want you to see what's out there and in the spirit world, and He's doing it to protect you. Have you ever come across somebody who tried to tell you that?
Yeah, I have. I'm really lucky. Well, I'm lucky, but I think it's also just the way that I vibrate. So I mostly attract people that don't try to over argue with me about it. Mostly what I attract are people who kind of think I'm nuts. And that's okay. But I do come across people who they more have that question for me, and they're hoping that I will, help them to navigate those fears. And I used to work as a midwife in heavily religious communities, so I can really see that there are a lot of people that do believe that and would believe that. And my feeling is that when I connect to the frequency of God, and this has always been true for me, it feels truly like love. And when I connect with the frequency of Christ consciousness, separate from the religion we call Christianity, I just feel like the whole message, when you get right down to the core, distilled core of the message, is always like, the kingdom of God exists within you and are all around you. And it is not, what was it? Like, something is not found in like wood and stone, basically saying that it's not only in the buildings that are built as places of worship, but that it's everywhere. And most certainly it's in you. And, you can do this too with faith, the grain of a mustard seed, and these miracles that you see me do, you can do these and greater, like that kind of messaging. And I feel like those resonate with me as the truth. There's nothing in my psyche that contradicts that. And so it feels like the truth to me. Whereas if I hear somebody say, God closed your third eye for a reason, then my psyche is like, but why would God create my third eye?
And that's always been my question.
That just seems so mean. Why wouldn't you just create me without a third eye?
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's how I feel about that. And again, that's just me, and it works for me. And I really, really respect everybody's right to have their own beliefs and to experience life through the lens of their own experience, their own selves, and not to feel like they have to take my word as truth, or anybody's word as truth for that matter. So I don't also feel like I need to convince anyone. This has just been very life-changing for me. So I feel good about it. Of course.
Cool. Yeah, I love everything you just said, especially the about it being within everything in this earth, and I always think I'm a conspiracy theorist, so I believe that there is a big, massive campaign of deception going on, and to block stuff like this out. But I also believe that they always hide like bits of truth in their deception. And one of the things that they always teach you in science class and growing up in school is that every living thing on this earth is connected in some way. We all have share some sort of DNA with plants and animals and grass and whatever. Everything shares some sort of DNA, and that's always been part of the way I think as well. Is maybe that common trait in the DNA that we share, or whatever science tells us, is that spirituality, that godliness, that, or the kingdom of God, whatever you want to call it, maybe that's what it is, and maybe we've just been conditioned to ignore it.
Yeah, I completely believe that. Like, I see so much evidence around me of, you know, a campaign of deception on, like, holy cow, like myriad, complex, nuanced, and sometimes very overt levels. And I really do believe that it is intended to disconnect us from this, and to
Of
keep
course.
us feeling fearful and superstitious about it, so that we're easier to control. But it is interesting because they do feed out pieces of the truth. And I think that's an important part, because we have those internal lie detectors and deception detectors. So if there's enough truth, it's like it doesn't trip our internal deception detectors. And I absolutely love what you're saying about the inherent connectedness of all matter on Earth, all representations of life on Earth. And we could probably find, I mean, it's not probably, well, I don't know, I haven't verified this for myself under a microscope. So, but that, you know, like even non-living objects like rocks, we share the same molecular, like the same basic molecular building blocks. So we are all connected, and it's all imbued with the consciousness of the divine, even if it doesn't have a nervous system that we recognize.
Of course. And so before we get crazy off topic, just to get back to the Akashic Records, so what is your story with the Akashic Records?
So I'd always kind of been interested in this stuff, as I'm saying, and yet I felt very, I don't know, like I had a hard time dealing with other people's reactions to me, and feeling like an outcast and a weirdo, and feeling alone for many years. And so I always was self-limiting in allowing myself to do these explorations for that fear. But about 5 years ago, almost 5 years ago, I got pregnant with my second child. It was a long-awaited second child. There was a big gap of 11 years in between my pregnancies, and I had always wanted more children. So it was really exciting. And he just was not for a long lifespan. But of course, I didn't know that when I got pregnant. And just through some, you know, frustrating serendipitous circumstances, his pregnancy was cut short, and he was born at 26 weeks, which is just over 6 months. So he had 3 months of cooking left to go. That's a lot of cooking that needs to happen. And he was so powerful and so strong, and he lived for 20 days. But ultimately we had to let him go, or we chose to, under the strong recommendations of our care team, which was excellent, because he just had like a systemic infection and brain bleeds, and there were so many things working against him, so that even if he pulled through, his quality of life would probably be very, very, very challenging. So we let him go, and that was really difficult. There's, you know, when I tell the story, like, there just aren't words for how it was to live through that. But suffice it to say that it was the most painful thing I'd ever experienced by far. And the trauma and the acute grief and the darkness was almost suffocating. And if I hadn't already had a living child, I might have tried to take my life to follow him. I don't know. Like, that was what I wanted to do. But I had a beautiful son who was alive already. That was, you know, the other half of my heart. So I had to try and navigate it with some grace for his sake. And if I couldn't physically follow my son, I could energetically and spiritually follow my son. And I could see all the ways that the son that passed away, his name was Killian. I could see all the ways that Killian had contacted me before he was even conceived. All of my children have done that. And then during the pregnancy and the ways that he had kind of slightly tweaked my life to prepare me for what was coming without changing the, the direction that things would go. I could feel his energy even when he was born and he was on the outside. It was a little bit different because he was occupying his body. And then I could feel him after he was gone too. And I would get messages from him, and they would always come through when I was feeling good. So in between the big waves of crushing grief, there would just be these periods where like your brain almost switches off and you go into denial for a little bit and you feel like a normal person temporarily. So it would always be those times where I would get the messages from him. So I made the connection that, oh, this is all my vibration. Like when I'm really, really, really feeling full of pain, it's too great of a vibrational distance for him to bridge that gap. So it became my focus to try and, whenever possible, fine-tune my vibration to be available to him. But I had this nagging question of like, and it wasn't nagging. It was like maddeningly persistent, unending, dogged question of why did this happen? Because my brain did what I think most humans' brains do. I made it my fault. And I assumed that like it was, from the time that I hurt this person, the time that I did that person, the time that I was a mean babysitter, the time that, blah, 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 blah. And I took like horrendous inventory of myself in this life. It was like the time I dropped something on the hospital floor and probably picked up a pathogen. It was the time that this, that, right. And it felt like I was in a hell loop. That was worse than the grief, because the grief felt like a way of loving him in a sense and honoring him. This just felt like torture. And then I, of course, had the question of like, I had an awareness that I had some other past lives. I'd had a couple past life memories. So I was like, what had I done in a different life? Like, I'm a horrible human being. I'm a horrible soul. What have I done? I need to know. And I think because I was so tormented by this question and the desire to know had absolutely no fear behind it, like I just needed to know, it led me to hear the term Akashic Records on actually the Matt Belair podcast, no relation. So I heard him, he had a guest on that talked about the Akashic Records, and the words just like, I don't know, they sounded like magic is the best way I could describe it. And I was like, oh, what is that? And I immediately looked it up and found a program that could teach me how to read the Akashic Records. And I knew I had to do it. And so I enrolled in the program, spent more money than I had ever. And in that moment, unbeknownst to me, I was stepping onto the path of my authenticity, which is amazing to think back about. But I enrolled in this program, learned how to read the Akashic Records, and eventually worked up the nerve to go in and ask my question. It was my very first time going into the Akashic Records. I didn't dick around with any little questions. I just knew that this was my whole reason. So I went in and I asked why this had happened. And I got this incredibly beautiful healing explanation that was nothing like what my brain had been telling me. It just felt like my perception was expanded to see that no, it wasn't anything I had done wrong, or my karma, so to speak. It wasn't my husband's karma because he had the same fears. It was actually, if you're going to call it karma, which is like semi-accurate, but we have weird misunderstandings around karma. It was our son's karma, but only insofar as he had a previous life experience that sort of left him feeling frustrated and like he wanted a do-over, basically. He wanted to, so he'd had a life during one of the world wars, I think it was World War I, where he'd been in the trenches and my husband had been there with him as one of his brother soldiers. And it was just awful. It was so intensely awful. and he just like reached his limit of what he could handle, and he chose to take his own life. And in that moment, when he was making that choice before he died, he could only process the consequences of that decision based on the trauma he was experiencing. But as soon as he died and the trauma was no longer, like drowning everything else out, and his perspective expanded, he immediately reconnected with his loved ones that he had left behind, and felt it. Kind of the way I described it is kind of like he felt that sort of like manly sense of like, oh, like I wimped out, or that's not quite the right way of putting it, but that sort of, disappointment and frustration. And he wanted a do-over. He wanted an experience that would, have a similar degree of suffering, but the agreement was he was not going to pull the plug on himself. He was going to wait to be released by his loved ones. And he gave us many exit points because my water broke at 20 weeks. It was an unexpected pregnancy on the third date. Like, we could have had an abortion reasonably, and we decided not to. And then then my water broke at 20 weeks, and the one of the options made available to us was to terminate at that time. And like, so he gave us all these ways to sort of like allow ourselves out without getting deeper and deeper into grief. And he would have stuck around, as I saw, if we hadn't released him when we did. But he was so thankful that we released him. And that was so healing for me. It just completely transformed my whole experience, my whole perception of that experience instantly. I had already been feeling a recognition of, some of the gifts that he had offered me. And I already genuinely felt like, it was all worth it for the honor of being his mother. But to understand it that fully and from that broad of a perspective, just really, I don't know, it released me from any residual perception that something had gone wrong, or that I had done something wrong, or that this was a tragedy in any way. I could see it as, oh, actually, that was a complete lifespan. That was his desire. He got exactly what he desired out of that. And he's now free to move on to a different experience without carrying the unfinished business of that previous life. And yeah, it just, and furthermore, like, it connected me with the fact that he's still my son, even though he's not here physically. It's just his body that's not here physically, but he continues to exist, and we continue to be in a relationship. And in different subsequent Akashic sessions with my own Akashic records, I was able to see, another lifetime we had together. And so I just don't feel diminished by that experience anymore. And that was so transformational and healing that I knew I was like, wow, I need to share this with other people. I need to make this accessible for other people.
Yeah, that's amazing. The relief that you were able to get through that. And I do have a couple questions here. So I know there's probably no mathematical sense to be made of it, but you said in your son's previous life, well, what ended in World War I, and is there any, I'm just wondering, is there any significance to the amount of time that passes between, when a person might die in one life and when they come back in the next life?
No, there's no significance. Time is just something that we get hung up on. But even and my brain gets hung up on it too, because it's part of the way that we process information here. But there's no significance that I can tell. There's no specific requirements or rest period or like like uniform span of time for all souls before they choose another incarnation or come into another incarnation. And even sometimes they can overlap, which kind of like, I don't know, it like mucks up my gears a little bit when I find it in the Akashic Records, because my human brain is like, but how? But I've even done a reading on somebody who his soul is currently simultaneously having an incarnation experience in Australia right now. And that aspect of him is aware of this aspect, but this aspect was unaware of that one.
So almost like a parallel
yeah
universe type situation. Okay.
Yeah, parallel life during this timeline. Yeah.
That's very that's actually pretty cool. I never really thought of something like that happening. And wow, yeah, to think that, because I've always heard of the the multiverse theory and the parallel universes, and how there's infinite numbers of you and out there, but then like to think that it could be happening on the same timeline, that's actually pretty fucking cool.
Yeah, it was unique. Like, it's not something I'm finding left, right, and center. That was definitely Lynn. I was like, whoa. As I was seeing it and getting the information, I was like, this is really cool. But I think, yeah, I mean, because really, really, as I understand it, this realm feels very real to us insofar as it is physically tangible through these bodies that are created from the matter of this realm. And we experience our interactions through our five senses with this realm, but it is just one expression of consciousness, and our consciousness is unlimited. It's only our human ego consciousness that is limited, if that makes sense.
No, of course it definitely does. I believe in all that, the limitations of our consciousness, our mind, and I think that's probably one of those limitations, are probably the reason I asked that question about time in the first place, is because humans we're obsessed with time, and we can't imagine a life without time. And even though that's probably, or you would know better than I would, how space and time kind of don't exist in the way that we perceive them to exist in the spirit world. And I think that's something we get hung up on a lot as humans in this reality. And I think that's what drives a lot of our curiosities, is time.
Yeah, but I also think, I really feel like time is part of the psyop, like that obsession with time.
Of course, yes.
Yeah, and breaking it down into like units is part. It's a psyop that's meant to totally distract us and limit our perceptions. Yeah, because I can see ways of existing, past and future ways of humans existing that are unburdened by those psyops, and time is like, we have a completely different relationship to it. It's still an experience that we have, because in the physical realm, we experience cause and effect, and we experience sort of like an unfolding narrative, but the way that we get fixated on it is definitely something that we're steered towards.
Of course. And so I'm just going to ask you some questions here that kind of relate to what you do with the Akashic readings and stuff. What are your feelings on like psychedelic drugs, and like, so people who say they take a trip on DMT, and like they find the meaning of life, and they're told the meaning of life. Do you think that using DMT or psilocybin or LSD, are those experiences that people have, do you think that those are real experiences, or are they just created by the drug? And do you think like maybe like the only way to get a real spiritual experience is through meditation?
No, I think that there's as many like really infinite pathways to having an expansion in our conscious perception. And I think that psychedelic drug experiences are totally valid, just as valid as any other experiences. So I haven't really used them. But it's mostly because, I was working as a healthcare provider and being in a cycle of like pregnancy, trying to conceive, and then, early postpartum young child motherhood. So it just feels to me like I never really have the time to set it aside and, play with that. So my understanding of it comes from that, from observing other people and talking to other people with it.
Okay.
I don't have any moral judgments against it at all. And I imagine I'll play with it when I have a better opportunity. But what it seems like to me is that the benefit of those substances, especially ones that are, organic ones that grow from the earth and aren't synthetically fabricated.
Yeah, LSD is created by the CIA.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not even throwing the baby out with the bathwater with those. It's just that they have more opportunity to yield confusing experiences. But like, for example, with psilocybin or from which I have used, or my understanding of ayahuasca or ibogaine, which I've only heard other people's accounts, what it feels like to me is that or DMT, it just modifies the chemicals that exist in our brain that moderate our experience of reality. So the way I understand it is we are surrounded by literally infinite consciousness and energy. And like I said, like this is just one bandwidth of vibration where it expresses in physicality. But it would be like saying that light only exists in the visible light spectrum.
I understand exactly what you mean. It's kind of like there are radio frequencies, and the drug or whatever allows you to get whatever frequency it is that you're chasing.
Yeah, exactly. Or expand your frequency anyway. So like
exactly.
if you take the light spectrum, there's a tiny sliver that's visible to us, to our naked eye, but we know that there are other waves, electromagnetic waves, that we are able to measure with our instruments that fall under, like, from gamma rays all the way to, God, is it X-rays? I can never remember the longest frequency.
I know what you're talking about. I'm not exactly sure of the terminology though.
Okay. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Somebody can look it up if they want to, but my whole point is that it's not like the electromagnetic spectrum ends at those frequencies of waves. It's just our instruments are not sensitive enough to perceive the wave beyond those boundaries, and or we are not given information about the waves beyond those boundaries. It's probably a combination of both. And so it's like the same with our brain. Like, what we experience as human beings as physically manifested information isn't all the information that there is, but it's what interacts with our physical vessel. And when you take psychedelics, it changes the internal chemistry temporarily of your physical vessel so that it can become more sensitive to perceiving more of the spectrum of information that is already surrounding us at all times anyway. And I believe that especially when people take it in a mindful way, they tend to have like really profound experiences that I consider to be real and totally valid. But with any kind of experience like that, including meditation induced experiences, or like for me with the Akashic Records, or anybody else that experiences like psychic phenomena or paranormal, whatever, as well as psychedelic induced experiences, it's all being filtered through our unique human psyche. So that's why I think there's like a lot of similarity across people's experiences, and yet a lot of variation, because everybody is so unique, and the way that we understand and make sense of what we're experiencing is so unique that we can't have completely exactly replicatable experiences, but we can find that there's a lot of commonality, if that makes sense.
Of course, it definitely makes sense. And there's just so much about spirituality that I love. And like, I kind of sit back and all like, and just take all this in. And it's very comforting to know that there's a lot of different ways of thinking, but also a lot of these different ways of thinking are very similar. And I just love to hear all these new ways of thinking. And I do have a couple more questions for you before our time ends here. And what have you ever had an experience reading somebody in a reading session that was bizarre or wild or kind of scared you, or really sticks out as a really memorable experience?
Yeah, well, I mean, nobody has scared me. I've definitely had experiences where I'm like, what? Like, this is different. So that one with the parallel life, that was one. I
Okay.
also did a reading on somebody who she came to me for a starseed reading. It was something that I was doing for a while, but I don't really do them anymore, but I get a ton of information about starseeds anyway through an Akashic reading. So I was like, I don't need to do a separate reading for this. But at the time I was. So she wanted to explore her starseed self. And what I found was so interesting. It's actually one of my podcast episodes, if anybody wants to. It's called A Starseed in Multiple Dimensions. But basically it was like, as I can remember, it was her consciousness was coming from a group of higher dimensional beings that appeared physical, like, so they were higher dimensional, but they weren't like of the, I don't know, they were still semi-human-ish. And they like were existing on this big, it felt like a big craft, but I don't really know where they were, because I don't think space is what we think it is, but I don't know what it is either. But anyway, it felt like they were on this big craft, and like huge, massively huge, rather than a planet, let's say. But I also got the sense that they had light bodies, and these, like, this craft was more of a mental construct than like a physical location. But anyway, they were like trickling their consciousness down into her, and down through, she had this whole through line of different incarnations that were, you know, in the no space time thing, we would call them parallel incarnations, but from our perspective, they must have been past lives, because they were at different previous points in our historical timeline. But it was all the same consciousness from this higher group of beings, and she was the most, like, she was the topmost one, so she had the most access to their level of consciousness, and they were just really interested in seeing how all those versions of her functioned with less and less of their awareness. But, you know, I don't know, it's so hard to describe. Like, I'm getting all these visuals, but it feels like, unless I can draw it, it's just so abstract sounding. But that was so interesting, because it was nothing like I previously had understood. And even then, like, I haven't seen that ever since. That was pretty unique to her, but also it depends so much on the questions that people are asking.
Okay.
and I've encountered like a good handful of demons through people now, but I'm not encountering the demons. It's like I can feel that somebody in their life. I feel very fortunate. The people who book in for readings with me are generally like pretty awake or on their awakening path and are pretty high vibrational already. They might have some stuff going on, or they might have some sort of adjacent negative entities floating around them, you know, trying to harness their thought patterns and bring them into lower vibrational.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I think that's something that happens a lot.
Yeah. Oh yeah, a ton. And then a couple times I felt that they were actually real demons, but again, it's not me. I'm not directly encountering the demon. It's more just like I'm aware that they're there, or it's influencing somebody else in their life or something like that. And recently I had my first similar encounter with a reptilian, which prior to that I was sort of like, really? I wasn't sure if they were real. I wasn't gonna like, I was kind of like, no comment, I don't know. And now I'm like, oh, okay, no, wait, they're real. And so what I could experience was that they are non-physical entities, and they're similar to our understanding of other negative low vibe entities that are non-physical, but they can influence our physical actions by basically like fucking with our thoughts and producing beliefs that produce emotions that keep us in a low vibe place.
Wow, that's a lot. And that's really cool that you said you mentioned you came in contact with the reptilians. I'm sure David Icke would like to hear a lot about that. And so Starseeds is, in a nutshell, you can choose to come back. Am I saying that correctly?
My understanding of Starseeds is that they are, or we are, and I feel at this point really confident that anybody I'm having this level of conversation with is also a starseed. So I'll just tell you, you're probably a starseed, because it's like they're characterized by being more awake and not able to fall under that deep hypnosis. Mm-hmm. And it's because we've already incarnated and done like a lot of this. We've been like, this is a cycle. This is just part of the great cosmic dance of like, it's not that Earth is a place we go to have this experience of polarity. It's like the experience of polarity is easy to access through anywhere that manifests in the physical third dimension vibrational bandwidth. And so a lot of us have already been through this experience of like, you know, the battle between good and evil, dark and light, however you want to understand it, unconsciousness and consciousness. And we've already like totally transmuted it and been through it on an individual level and a collective level. So it's kind of like, you know, when you're playing a video game and you've like beat the whole thing, the next time you go back and play the game, it's going to be way easier, mm-hmm. because you know how it works. So we've come to Earth to have that influence of consciousness, because it's really like, I don't know, there are a lot of souls that are really stuck in that brainwashed place, really, really stuck, and they can't mm-hmm. ever seem to get out. It's like, it's almost like being stuck in quicksand. And so we've come back to be non-hypnotizable, or to wake up from our hypnosis more dramatically than the earthbound souls are, and thereby elevate the collective consciousness that's available to humans as incarnated humans, because free will is a really real thing, and it can't be violated. Even though it looks like we violate it all the time, we actually can't truly violate somebody's free will. We can only manipulate them out of it. And so, and even then, like, it's still, so if we're just so we hear a lot about the Pleiadians, for an example. The Pleiadians are beings that have already been through all this, and the ones who are not incarnated on Earth currently, they are usually acting as guides for people, and they are trying. They are like, they care, they are delivering messages, but very much like my son was, we can't receive them if we're not in the vicinity to receive them, if we're not in a vibrational rate, that meaning in our consciousness, in our thoughts and our feelings, if we're not at a place where they can pass that on and transmit it to us, then they can just be blasting that stuff at us all day, but we can't receive it. And they also can't really interfere on our behalf because that goes against free will. So to get around it, a bunch of us have come to be humans and to play the game again with the benefit of our previous experience. And it's a little bit different because we generally really don't have karma, or we don't have a lot of karma. We're just doing a lot of healing on behalf of the collective, on behalf of the families that we're born into or the communities that we're born into, and just basically being as awake and high consciousness as possible while still living human lives, and therefore still being subject to very human experiences and emotions and perceptions.
And it's gonna sound crazy, but I feel like you're making perfect sense. And I feel like a lot of people would hear that and be like, "What the fuck are you talking about, Amy?" Like this, but it just feels like it makes perfect sense. It feels like something that would happen naturally, and it's so crazy because I love these things that I hear from you, and then like from other spiritual people in general. They're things that like I'll hear them and I'll be like, well, that just makes perfect fucking sense. And it's almost like I've seen, like you said, it's like almost like I've seen this before, and like I've been experienced to it before, and there's a reason why I'm not as reluctant to it as other people are. And I'm just kind of, it's you can't see my face right now, but I'm kind of like in shock because of how like natural it sounds to me.
Yeah, and I think that's like, those are the indicators that, like, for example, if anybody's listening and they're like, well, how do I know if I'm a starseed? It, like, those are the indications because it makes sense to you. Whereas somebody who has not been through this experience, therefore they hold no memory of it. So it doesn't resonate with them on any level of truth. And they're way, way, way more susceptible to the belief and the persuasion of our perception to really lock into everything that's physically manifested as being the only thing that's real.
Of course. Well, Amy, it's been a fantastic hour speaking with you. You've been a tremendous guest. I want to thank you again for coming on the show and dropping all this spiritual knowledge on us, and hopefully setting some of my listeners up to become awakened and take a step towards the spiritual journey. And I want to give you the opportunity. I don't have a very big audience, but I do want to give you the opportunity to go ahead and tell everybody where they can find your show. And I know you have a few other things going on. If you want to talk about, what you do in your bread and butter, if you go right ahead.
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. First of all, the hour went really fast.
It did.
So the best places to find me are, I have a podcast called Third Eye Awakening, and it's just really where sometimes I'll randomly rant, but lately I'm having so many similarly wonderful conversations with other people about their own perceptions and their own spiritual awakening experiences to try and make a community, or do my part in making a community where, people who are awakening and feel very alienated in their personal lives and their personal relationships can go and be like, oh, okay, it's not just me. And yeah, so it's called Third Eye Awakening, and it's basically available like most of the places where podcasts are available. Then I have a Facebook group called Soul Space, which is probably where I'm most active. And I show up and go on little rants there, usually about once a week, or maybe sometimes a little bit more than that. And the only cost of admission is to answer the 3 damn questions. A lot of people, I put it, I'm like, please answer all 3 questions. Otherwise I can't, because I just want to keep trolls out, basically, right? And like, you can answer 1 word, I don't care. But a lot of people just don't answer the questions. And I'm like, bah. And then I'm at the northstar.love on Instagram. I'm currently having a website built, but it doesn't exist. So you can find my link tree in my Instagram handle, or you can message me. I also have an email address, which is amy@thenorthstarguidance.com, but email's spotty. I get so many emails and they fall farther and farther down the list, and can be hard for me. It's easy to lose them somehow. But if you don't have Facebook or Instagram, I don't blame you. And so that's one way to get a hold of me. Otherwise, I do Akashic readings, obviously. And I also run various group programs and courses that they literally just come through as they come through. So I really don't plan them. It's like my team of non-physical beings that I'm in contact with, my guides and such, are like, this is what you're doing now. And I'm like, oh, okay. So the one I've got going right now is it's called the Akashic Ascension Mastermind. I'm super excited about it. It's just starting tomorrow. It's an 8-week program. Or it's not a program, it's a mastermind, where basically I can feel that my job is to go in and sort of go into the Akashic Records and let the participants just free ask whatever they want, and just retrieve the information. So it's mostly on Ascension topics, but the questions can be personal or they can be general. And I'm also going to deliver some psychic activations and Akashic attunements so that people can connect to that frequency themselves through this program. Or this mastermind. So I'm super excited about that. And that's pretty much all I've got going on at the moment.
All right. Well, that's all. That you have a lot going on. You're a very busy person, and it just speaks volumes about your character for coming on the show and taking time to help me out here. And so again, thank you. And if you could just hold on for 1 moment after I stop recording, that would be great.
Sure.
Okay, guys, I hope you guys really enjoyed this episode. The conversation I had with Amy Belair, I think it was a great conversation and a eye-opening conversation, hopefully for a lot of you. And if you weren't on the spiritual journey, trying to find a spiritual awakening already, hopefully now you are, or you can start to open your eyes and maybe open your third eye. Again, thank you for tuning into this episode. And if you enjoyed the episode, please do like and share the post. If you see it on Facebook or Twitter, retweet it, comment, leave a rating on Apple Podcasts. Again, we are a 5-star podcast on Apple Podcasts, so that's fucking awesome. So again, share it with everybody you can if you like the show, and hopefully we'll grow a bigger audience together, and we'll get some more guests, some more great guests in addition to the great guests that I've already had on here, and we'll continue to grow our name. And then like I always say, I want to remind you guys to keep on keeping on. Remember that we are all gods out here, and have a wonderful day.